Thank you. So I'm going to welcome everybody this morning to joining us here with our glorious and great opportunities to spend our beginning of the Western New Year with Jetsunma Tenzin Palmo, and that we really have this precious opportunity to have her graciously accept our invitation to grant us some question and answer period, especially on Lojong, what she just mentioned, this practice of giving and taking, really accepting, really the heart of the method practice of being able to accept the sufferings of others, accept the miseries of the world, the challenges, the ignorance, the pain, the anger, the selfish grasping, all that's arising out of fear and creating much more misery than any one of us would ever want. And so these 8 verses of mind training are very concise and pith instructions, but they're really profound instructions of the practice of being able to live with ultimate compassion in the view of ultimate wisdom. So we're very grateful. We sent out the links to the teachings that Jetsunma gave a few years ago with the verses on the mind training. So we're not going through those. And we invited people to welcome their own questions on the practice, which I will read to Jetsunma. She has received them, and then she will give us her insight on these questions. And if there's a little bit of time, we'll have a little space for questions that might arise in your own heart mind spontaneously as we go through these. So Jetsunma, thank you again for being here. And we'll begin with the questions. The first question: what is the most effective way to integrate the 8 verses of training the mind into my meditation practice? How do I start?
Well, I mean, I think really apart from verse 7, which is on Tonglen, the giving and taking meditation, most of these verses are actually advice for daily life, and especially for our interactions with difficult people. So it's not really a meditation per se, but nonetheless, every morning, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, it's a good idea at the end of our formal meditation practice to read through these verses. And also it's a good idea to do a bit of analytical meditation, like take a verse and really sit down and think about it. What is it telling us? And in these circumstances, how are we responding? Because it's all about taking our habitual responses and transforming them if they're negative. So we are not any of us high-level bodhisattvas. Well, you might be, but anyway, probably not yet. So we can't expect to be perfect in this, And it's very important. Personally, I think it's very important not to suppress our actual reactions and pretend they're not there, because good little bodhisattvas don't think like that, right? We have to be honest, at least with ourselves. And so when any of these unfortunate situations arise, we should be conscious of how we feel habitually, and then work on that from that side. Accept, this is how I'm feeling. I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm hurt, I'm humiliated. Accept that. And then work on how to transform that feeling in the way that he is advising, But I think it's very important not to just be in a state of denial, because we know that's not how we should be thinking, but that is how we are thinking. So accept that. Okay, fair enough. We recognize it, we accept it. Now, what can we do to use this as our path to transform? So therefore, it is useful to go through all the 8 verses, but also to take them verse by verse. One day one verse, one day another verse, or one week one verse, one week another verse, and just sit with it and think about it, and how we can relate this to our lives, so that when these unfortunate situations arise, gradually we will spontaneously respond in a way which is helpful. It's helpful for us. This is the point. It's not just helpful for them, it's helpful for us not to have all these negative feelings inside of ourselves, which hurt us and doesn't do anything for the person that's annoyed us, but it's really causing us pain. So we don't want to be in pain, and we don't want to create more pain for others. So therefore, these responses, although they're counterintuitive sometimes, nonetheless, actually, they do work. And again, like His Holiness shows you, I mean, he could be very bitter and angry about the Chinese. I mean, they did everything nobody would want them to do if they were Tibetans. But he doesn't hate them. He understands them, he has compassion. And I mean, many of his very closest students are Chinese from mainland China. And, he understands they're just people like everyone else. They all have Buddha nature. And sometimes governments are misguided. What to do? So like that, I would say just take it and use it and look at it and really work with it so that when the actual situation arises, we know where we're going. Okay.
Thank you. Okay, and that leads then right into the Tonglen question. How would I go about incorporating a Tonglen practice along with meditating on the 8 verses of training the mind?
Well, exactly that. I mean, Tonglen, of course, is the crux of the Lojong practice of taking in the dark and sending out. You have another question on Lojong later on, I think.
On the Tonglen, on visualizing the black.
Then, yeah, we can deal with it more.
Yeah. Okay, that's number 3. When we practice Tonglen, visualizing inhaling the black smoke, I have a strong aversion to actually doing that. I know it is to destroy the ego, but still the fear of doing the practice prevents me from really trusting it. Is it better to start with someone we know how to overcome the fear?
So now personally, I think if you feel fear when you are doing the Tonglen practice, then that is actually a good sign, because it means you're taking it seriously, right? And the ego is in panic. Oh my goodness, I hope this doesn't work. So it's a good sign. Don't be afraid. I mean, if you can just do it and no problem at all, it's probably very superficial. But this is a challenge to our self-cherishing mind. That's the whole point. It's death to the ego. And so, of course, the ego is in panic. And so, no problem. This is good. As I say, we are not egoless, high-level bodhisattvas, and we have to deal with ourselves at the level where we are. Therefore, I think the suggestion that we start the practice by taking on the suffering, if there is suffering, of someone that we love more than ourselves. For example, your child. If your son or daughter is suffering, is very ill, or is any way, going through a hard time, you would do anything to take that suffering from them. You would be willing to take their suffering onto yourself if they could be free from that. And this is natural. I mean, any good parent, at least, will definitely want to take on the suffering of their child. If they could, they would be happy to do that if the child could be free. So it's not impossible, is what I'm saying. This is not just some impossible ideal. Even in ordinary life with ordinary people, they could feel that if it was someone that they loved enough. So the Buddha always said, when it comes to loving kindness and compassion, just as a mother loves her child, her only child, that selfless love, that especially when the child is very small, very vulnerable, the mother or the father would do anything for that child's well-being, even if it meant their own suffering, which it does. I mean, even just bringing up a child, having all the late nights and all the hassle of having to bring up their children and educate their children, what parents do. It's actually very selfless. So this idea of bringing in the suffering of others and willingly offering them our well-being in exchange, it's not impossible. It's not totally idealistic. The problem is only to extend that love and compassion further and further and further, not just to those that we love deeply and feel attached to, but gradually feeling that feeling in our heart. So we work on something which is real for us. And then that warmth of feeling and longing, gradually, slowly, we extend it further and further out. That's the idea, until it becomes unconditional. That's the work. I mean, this is all training. It's called mind training. So we're all training ourselves. It's not that immediately we got there. It's like if you're training for some sport, we don't immediately become proficient. It takes a lot of work. If you want to become a musician or proficient in any skill, we have to work at it. Start where we are, at the beginning, and gradually over and over and over until it just becomes habitual. So yes, start with something easier, which is someone we love, even somebody's dog. I mean, some people are very attached to their dogs. And if their dogs become sick, they would do anything to take that sickness on themselves so their pet wouldn't suffer, which is perfectly valid. It's all love and compassion. And so that's what we have to work on, like that. So anyway, yes, so this trepidation of the ego at the beginning is not a bad sign. It's a good sign.
Okay, thank you, Jetsunma. Then I'm going to go, not right on this list, I'm going to go to this extra question that came that I sent afterwards. I think maybe that's a better follow-up. Can you please help us deepen our understanding how the habits, actions, and attitudes we cultivate through Lojong practice, along with improving our behavior, might also support our formal meditation practices to cultivate non-dual awareness?
Well, I mean, there's not actually per se a direct correlation. This is dealing more with relative truth than ultimate truth, to be honest. This is not Mahamudra. But nonetheless, bodhicitta is ultimate bodhicitta, which is the nature of the mind, the non-dual awareness, as well as the relative bodhicitta, which is the aspiration to, walk the path to enlightenment for the sake of all beings. So they are both two sides of the same coin, really. But we start where we are. I mean, I think it's very important to start where we are. And, all these books and texts are written from the point of view of very high level bodhisattvas. They show us how a perfect bodhisattva would act. And for the rest of it, we have to do the best we can with who we are. And as Atisha and others all say, we should be very natural, right? We should be genuine. We shouldn't try to counterfeit and try to act like we think a bodhisattva would act. We should be who we are, but aspiring to use all these different situations which come up in our life to understand how we are reacting, and then actually how it would be better to respond in a more skillful way, because many of our responses are unskillful. Okay, they're unskillful. So how can I work to make them more skillful? That's the point. You know, I mean, we are like, if you think of a seed of a Bodhi tree planted in our hearts, then we're watering it every day. And this little Bodhi tree begins to sprout, and slowly, 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 it begins to grow and get stronger and put down big roots. But it doesn't happen overnight. I mean, you don't wake up next morning, you've got a Bodhi tree. It's all gradual, 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 and it needs everyday fertilizing and watering and pruning and pulling out the weeds. But the potential for the Bodhi tree is there because it's a Bodhi seed. It's not going to turn up into an apple tree or even into some poisonous plant. It's not. It will eventually, if it's properly watered and cared for, it will end up being a Bodhi tree because that's a seed. So our Bodhisattva vow and our aspiration is the seed. And then all these Lojong practices and all the practices we are doing is to cultivate that. And so eventually it will come up, but it takes a bit of time. But even the sprouts are potential Bodhi trees. I mean, it's all part of the Bodhi tree, just we don't recognize it. So all of us have Buddha nature. That's a given. All of us have basic goodness. And so this Lojong practice is to cultivate that basic goodness, believe in that basic goodness, know that's our true nature. And every time we act with kindness, with generosity, with compassion, with affection, we are expressing our true nature. It's not it's coming from somewhere else. It's opening up inside us who we really are naturally. And so all these Lojong practices are for helping us to come back to our true nature, which is indeed, as Mingyur Rinpoche was saying in his Happy New Year message, awareness, love, compassion, and wisdom. That's who we are. And so every time we express this in whatever way, we are coming closer and closer and closer to our true nature, which is the non-dual awareness. So Lojong is also a way of purifying the mind, a very powerful way of purifying the mind and overcoming the negative poisons which want to strangle the Bodhi tree. We have to keep pulling out those weeds and using those weeds also as mulch through Tantra.
Okay, thank you, Jetsunma. So I don't know if maybe this number 5 question's better. How does, instead of emptiness, maybe how does dependent arising relate to verse 8?
Well, you know, I mean, we are told, when we are told to see things as illusion, as in number 8, right? It says about, may I recognize things as like illusions and without attachment, gain freedom from bondage. So to see things as illusions means to see their essential empty nature. And that means that we stop reifying everything. Reifying means making things into things, something very permanent, very solid, very enduring, and outside of our own perception of it. Even if I don't perceive it, it's exactly how I seem to perceive it, right? It's always self-existent from its own side. So that is our basic delusion. I mean, this is where really neuroscience becomes really quite interesting, because they are showing also there is no such thing as color. These are vibrational whatevers, which is interpreted by our brain, which cannot see or hear or taste or touch. The brain puts it all together and creates something which we then grasp as being outside ourselves as our reality. This is where it becomes very fascinating. I'm trying to read through this book on neuroscience, which is very difficult if you don't know anything about this sort of thing. But certain parts are really very fascinating because they echo insights which were gained thousands of years ago in Asia. The Asians knew all about this. And, you know, because the West has become so wedded to materialistic dogma, it couldn't see. But nowadays, because there is so much more interest in consciousness among neuroscientists, before they used to throw consciousness out, it was the elephant in the living room. Now they are actually studying what is consciousness. And the first thing they discovered is that it's not the brain. So that's a big step forward for them. That they use the brain, but it is not the brain. And it cannot be caught on the machine because it is non-material. Anyway, so the point is therefore that how we perceive things is not how things really are. And so therefore, as our awareness clarifies, as our ability to be really aware and conscious becomes more clear, then we begin to see things more like a rainbow or a mirage and so forth. In other words, they are brought together by causes and conditions. And it's not how they appear to be. This is where it really gets very interesting. I mean, great meditators can do all sorts of things which ordinary people cannot do because they do not see things as solid and self-enduring as we think them to be. So they perceive things in a whole different way. So therefore, obviously, our task is to stop grasping at things as being exactly a reality the way we see them. Because then if we see that things are much more illusory than they appear to be, then we stop grasping. Grasping is that which creates the problem. When we go beyond grasping, then essentially there's no hope and fear. And then the mind is released. We are liberated. Because not only do we see chairs and tables are not as solid and self-existing as we think, but also the ego, which is the really important thing. The ego is not as solid and self-existing as we think either. And as we begin to recognize that and recognize the emptiness of our thoughts and our feelings and our sense of me and mine, as that begins to dissolve into a much more open, spacious kind of clarity of mind, then inwardly we feel a release because we're no longer the slaves of the ego. We become the masters of our own mind. And so this is really what meditation is for. It's for us to understand what is the mind, and it's not what we think.
It's truly good news.
Isn't it? I mean, it is good news because we are not who we think we are. This little ego identity, this mask, this persona which we are wearing, you know, the mask. Behind that is this vast, open, spacious clarity of mind, luminous as well as empty. Empty, not in the sense of nothing, but in the sense of open space, ungraspable, unseeable, but everything can appear within it. That's the whole point. And it's all pervading, so that when we do realize our non-dual awareness, that sense of I and other completely just disappear. They just don't pertain anymore because we recognize our interconnection with the reason why we're destroying our planet is because we think we're little separate entities, disconnected from everybody else, disconnected from other humans, disconnected from all the animal realm, disconnected from nature. And so therefore we can destroy anything because it doesn't matter. But in fact, we're all deeply interconnected, and the universe itself is highly intelligent. I think I think the earth will manage perfectly well with the humans or without them, probably better without them. But it will, the world itself has great intelligence. Every blade of grass has its own intelligence. Every cell of our being has its own intelligence. We are living in a highly intelligent universe of which we are an integral part. Anyway, yes, so things are not the way they appear to be, but much, much more extraordinarily beyond thought wonderful than we can ever imagine. But we can experience, this is a good thing, we can realize that. It's not just theory. I mean, many people have actually, their minds have opened up to how things really are.
Yeah, once it,
and then, and then the problem is then they lose interest often in what they've been doing all their life because it seems so irrelevant to how things really are. Anyway, yes.
Once at Tushita, I heard one of the young guides who was guiding the meditation call it mind-blowing interconnection. This phrase always sticks with me. I loved it because it was so many young people and they were really taking that in and really wanting to know that. And mind-blowing interconnection is like that pith little phrase captures it really well.
It's true. I mean, it blows the conceptual mind.
Yeah,
and people are never the same afterwards. This is why in Mahamudra and Dzogchen especially, there's a great emphasis on realizing the nature of the mind. The main role of the guru, of the lama, the teacher, is to point out the nature of the mind, because once we see that, then everything else falls into place. Until that, we're still in the domain of the ego. I mean, after that, the ego takes over, of course, and thinks it's enlightened. But nonetheless, the point is that one glimpse, the thick black clouds, then suddenly we see the sky. Even the thick black clouds come back. Now we know there is a sky. And that those clouds depend on the sky, but they are not the sky. And that's a big breakthrough for the mind. It does blow the mind, I think. Many people have completely changed their whole life course just because of that, just seeing that, even when they weren't expecting it, especially when you're not expecting it. Anyway.
Yeah. So thank you, Jetsunma. Beautiful, wonderful teachings. Number 4, I'm going to go to now. I'm working on my shamatha practice and it is getting more steady. Intellectually, I can understand emptiness, selflessness, but what is the best way to actually experience it? Can you please suggest what might be helpful as a practice to be able to get there?
Okay, so, from an experiential point of view, shamatha is really very important. It's the basis because first of all, it helps to calm the mind. Our monkey mind begins to settle down, which is very important. But also, and especially, it cultivates our attention, our ability to be mindful, to be aware. And this is very important because awareness is really the crux of the matter. So, however, normally when we are cultivating mindfulness in shamatha practice, we are mindful, we are attentive, we focus on the breath or on the thoughts or on the sensations, or anyway, we are focused on something. Our attention, instead of running around after our thoughts, is stable and stays on one point. That's the essence of the shamatha practice. But although, therefore, this is a great gift, our awareness becomes very clear and our ability to stay focused on one point becomes more stable. The mind begins to quieten down a bit, but it is still dualistic. There is the subject the mindfulness, and the object, the breath, the thoughts, the sensations, walking, whatever we're on. So when our awareness becomes clear and stable, that we're able to stay centered, we are conscious of witnessing. We are conscious of being conscious, right? We are witnessing, and we see ourselves witnessing the breath, the thoughts, or whatever is our object of concentration. At that point, when that division is there, very clear, we're no longer in the thoughts, we are stepping outside. At that point, we drop the object, and we are simply aware of being aware. There's no subject, there's no object. There's just awareness. So this is compared to an eagle, right? If you think of an eagle, then unlike little birds which have to flap their wings in order to keep up, an eagle, once it's up, it's just floating effortlessly. But that eagle is not asleep. That eagle is very, very awake. It's said that an eagle can see 10 miles with absolute clarity. Of course, it's thinking about its lunch, but nonetheless, it is completely relaxed, right? It's just floating and completely aware of everything, but without effort. So that is how the mind should be, right? So we get that ability to be very clear mindfulness and very clear awareness, very clear knowing quality of the mind. It knows. Then we drop the object, whatever the object was, breath, thoughts, sensations, and we just stay up there. You know, we use the breath, for example, to get up. Then once we're up, the air current holds us. We don't need to flap our wings anymore. We just float with total clarity and the open spaciousness of the mind. And that can lead directly back to a realization of non-dual awareness, to the nature of the mind. That in itself is not the nature of the mind. It's still shamatha. But it can be like a bridge back to this primordial consciousness. That's an easy way of doing it. Based on shamatha.
Okay, thank you, Jetsunma. Now, number 6, how can we use our practice of Tonglen to benefit a child struggling with anger issues and those around him?
Well, I mean, if you want to use Tonglen for this, then when you, with the in-breath, you visualize all the darkness of the anger and the causes of the anger. Because anger doesn't come from nowhere. Anger has something which has brought this up, maybe in a child's upbringing, maybe from past life, maybe from whatever. But there's a reason for that anger. So we are taking in that as well. Imagine the child there, and that we're sucking up, like a vacuum cleaner. You're just sucking up the dark energy, which is the anger and that which has caused the anger in the first place. And so then you take that out, and then you, on the out breath, you send out the light of, you know, peace and happiness and contentment and all these other things like this, you know. So that's what you do. I mean, you can just sit there looking at anything, but in your mind, you're taking out that dark energy and replacing it with quiet, peace, calm, happiness. Because, you know, when we're angry, we're not happy. And we want that child to be happy. We want all beings to be happy. All beings want to be happy. They might not know how to be, but in their heart, they want well-being. And this is the basis also for the Lojong, is to recognize that all of us wish for happiness, some kind of inner sense of satisfaction and fulfillment, well-being. And all beings have Buddha nature. Let us never forget. This anger is not intrinsic to our nature. It's called adventitious, which means it comes from outside. It's not something which is inherent in our nature. It's very bad habitual patternings, which we have learned throughout our time in samsara. But it's not, it's the pollution on the silver pot, but that pollution never ever stains the silver pot. This is what we must remember. And of course, we are not really. But the nature of the mind, if you think like the sky, however thick the pollution may be, however dark the clouds, however Delhi-like thick pollution you've got, it doesn't really taint the essential nature of the sky. That always stays completely pure, no matter what. So all this anger, frustration, greed, jealousy, all these fear, anxiety, depression, these are black clouds, but they are not the sky. That's why we can transform. If they were part of our essential nature, then give up hope. But we are not sinful beings. We are completely pure and perfect in our true nature. That's what we have to get back to. Mm.
Thank you, Jetsunma. Okay, and then in number 8, in verse 2, while we are holding others most dear, how does one avoid becoming like a doormat, becoming too passive, or adding to negative, low self-esteem? We'll start with that part of it.
Well, I mean, honestly and truthfully, where are we? Let's think. What did I think about that? All right. So first of all, now, are we doing that? Yes, about holding ourselves as being least of all, right?
Yes.
Okay, so first of all, Geshe Langri Tangpa was mostly addressing monks, many of whom would have been geshes, with lots of, who really thought themselves very special and superior to others on account of their education and the fact they were monks, right? So bashing them on the head a bit doesn't hurt them. They had very, very hard heads, right? Believe me. But for ordinary people, I mean, we know the story of how when, during the Mind Science Conference with His Holiness, when, he was talking about this and about putting ourselves as inferior to all other beings. And then one of the neuroscientists or psychiatrists said, well, what about low self-esteem? And His Holiness didn't know what he was talking about. What's that? And he said, it's when you don't like yourself. When you feel inferior and you don't like yourself, you hate yourself. And His Holiness just thought and then said, I think very rare, very rare. And then the eminent neuroscientist turned to all his colleagues and says, whoever feels low self-esteem and self-hatred, and everybody put their hand up. Because in general, Tibetans, even of very low social standards, they have a sense of inner pride, of inner self-esteem, which helped them very much when they became refugees. But anyway, in the meantime, for ordinary people, then I would say that instead of saying lowest or most inferior, we say least important, right? And that means that when we are with others, we are much more interested in them. The person we are with is the most important, not us. Not what are they thinking about me? Are they impressed with what I'm looking like or how I'm speaking, or what is everybody thinking about me? Forget the me. When we're with others, the most important is the other. And this is really, really the essence of what it's trying to say, is that we step out the way. We step out of the limelight and we give the interest and the importance to the others. We listen to other people. We note them. We appreciate them. We try to make them feel better just from being with us for a short time. We are polite to them. We are nice to them. We appreciate their Buddha nature. However difficult they may or may not be, we appreciate their potential. And we're not thinking me, me, me. That's the point. Right? So it's not about being a doormat. It's about stop being so absolutely fixated on the ego and become much more interested in others in an open, empathetic way, even if they're difficult.
Well, even then, if we're really practicing, we can be appreciative in some ways that they're giving us a chance to practice our patience, even if they're
well, this is what it's all about. Yeah. This is what it's all about. But we still appreciate that their essential nature is good.
Yeah.
They might not realize it. They might not be acting it out, but nonetheless, ultimately, they have Buddha potential just the same as everyone else.
Yeah. Thank you, Jetsunma. The other second part of this was, in other words, many women or people of color or people of lower socioeconomic status are taught to kind of naturally defer in social settings. And this results sometimes in silencing or being made invisible. So when we're practicing, how do we, I guess, hold a ground of that inner dignity and also avoid conflict, but still find voice?
Of course, in the Tantra, we practice what is called the pride of the deity. In other words, if you were doing like Tara meditation or Chenrezig meditation, one visualizes oneself as one's own potential. I mean, we are ultimately Tara. We just don't know it. We are ultimately Chenrezig. We've just lost sight of that. But that's who we truly are. So that gives us that inner dignity because we are meeting people from the point of view of our own Buddha nature. But of course, it doesn't mean that I am Tara and the rest of you are just little sentient beings. Poor things. During the visualization, then lights go out and all beings transform into Tara or Chenrezig. And I mean, some texts say the nature of all males is Chenrezig, the nature of all females is Tara. Of course, Tara and Chenrezig are not dual ultimately, but just for the sake of if maybe men don't want to go around thinking of themselves as Tara. They might. But the point is that we recognize our own inner potential, but also at the same time, the inner potential of all. And that has nothing to do with race or gender or economic situation. I mean, it's our own innate dignity as the deity. And so, but dealing with other deities, because you're all within a mandala, right? So it's deities meeting with deities. And so then in that case, there's no question of high or low. It's all that we are inwardly acknowledging each other's potential. So, I mean, that's the point. This is not about to make us feel worse than we do already and tell us we're really stupid and inferior and hopeless. As I said, he was talking to monks, and monks all have a superior complex. So it was good for them to hear if they come into with a bunch of nuns that the nuns are the more important, right? It's very good for their egos. So the point is that to recognize that ultimately there's no higher or lower. But in the meantime, just as I say, rather than thinking higher or lower, to think, you know, at this point, when we meet with others, the other is the most important and the most interesting and the one that we have to concentrate on, not ourselves and our own feelings, but them. How can we make them feel better? How can we give out? I mean, like, again, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, whoever he meets, really, it undercuts a lot of these politicians and things, because he treats them the same as he would treat the, you know, the porter or the taxi driver. He just sees people's actual, who they really are behind the masks we're all wearing. Because, you know, masks are just masks. And behind that, we are all, on one level, very vulnerable human beings, but on the other level, we also all have Buddha potential. And that's what we have to think about. Not, you know, is that person more beautiful than me, or more rich than me, or more successful than me? No, who's the me? You know, you're Tara, you're Chinrezig, what's your trouble?
Okay. In verse 6 and 7, in verses 6 and 7, where does one draw the line at being mistreated very unjustly? Well, I think we already have that, so we're Tara. But what is the best method for taking defeat upon myself and giving victory to the others? Should we expose ourselves to harm, verbal abuse, or physical, emotional, or is this just metaphorical?
Well, obviously, when someone treats us badly, we have a choice. We can choose to nurture feelings of grievance and revenge, and that harms us. I mean, it harms us much more than it harms the other person. Some people hold on to their you know, their grievances forever, basically. You know, things which happened, you know, 30, 40 years ago, they're still holding it at the center of their heart, you know, and how to get revenge on that person. So, I mean, that harms us, doesn't hurt them. So it's pretty stupid, right? So therefore we can decide, well, this person treated me badly as a result of some karmic interconnection with them from before. Maybe last lifetime I treated them badly. But in any case, whatever is the reason, which we cannot know, and who cares, let go of resentment, right? That's the most important thing, to let go and wish them well, right? But at the same time, of course, obviously, if it's actual abuse, or if people are really trying to cheat us or do bad things to us, I mean, we're not stupid, right? I mean, we can defend ourselves, we can take action against them, we can do all sorts of things. The important thing is the basic, what did I say here, what it is? No, but what I'm trying to say is that it's our basic attitude with which we deal with the situation, whether it is from anger and desire for revenge, which is very negative, or whether it is actually out of kind of compassion for them, for their wrong thinking and their wrong actions and the karma they are making, and compassion for ourselves that we have to endure this both. So in that way, we can use these Lojong teachings, which doesn't mean that we therefore, if somebody hits us, we say, oh, you know, that's okay, it's my bad karma, so you should hit me some more. It's not like that. But nonetheless, I mean, compassion can be very fierce. I mean, this is one thing we should all recognize. when we look at Tara, I mean, on our wall, we have the 21 Taras in their different aspects. And usually we think of Tara looking very sweet, smiling, holding a lotus, radiating lights. But some of those forms of Tara, she is very wrathful. She's black and wrathful. But she's still compassionate. She has fearless compassion. But that can be very, you know, I mean, with your children, if you're always sweet and sweet and sweet and give in and give in and give in, you're going to have a hell of a time when they grow up. We are not being kind to our children to act like that. They have to have boundaries. And sentient beings have to have boundaries. So we cannot allow them just to get away with anything. But our motivation is because we see the harm they're doing to themselves as well as to us. Do you understand? I mean, Chenrezig, who is white and holding lotus and looking very peaceful, his other aspect is Mahakala, the great black one, the Lord of all the protectors. That is also Chenrezig. And in the rituals to Mahakala, it says how you perform, all these protectors perform very wrathful actions out of their great compassion. Because sometimes we need that, right? Mm-hmm. So it's not about making us weak and victims and vulnerable, but it's about being very careful what our motivation is behind our actions, how we deal with things skillfully, which will benefit not just ourselves, but especially will benefit the others. And sometimes to stop people and say no is the most compassionate thing we can do, isn't it? You understand? I mean, we don't all become idiots, but sometimes it just to say, okay, if you want that, that makes you happy. I mean, for instance, I have a friend and she comes from quite an affluent family, although she herself is not affluent at all. But she's very clever and she's very artistic. She does very nice paintings and she also writes books and she's very, very clever. She has about 3 PhDs in various subjects. But her father died and his will, if he left a will, was ambiguous. And her brother, who was a millionaire, wanted to take all the money. He didn't want to divide it between himself and his sister. He wanted to take it all. And he was going to take her to court to, plead his cause. And she thought, well, if he takes me to court, first of all, this will drag on for years because it always does. And also it will cost a lot of money, which I don't have. And he will get top lawyers because he's very wealthy. I will just have to get what the state gives me. Is it worth it? If it makes him happy to have this extra money, which he doesn't need, then honestly, I give the victory to him. And she remembered this verse, the verse which says about, I will take the defeat upon myself and give the victory to others. And so she said, okay, I take the defeat on myself, give the victory to you, may you be well and happy. And she got on with her life. And she's perfectly happy. I don't know what the brother's doing. She said he was an alcoholic. But she's fine, Yeah, it would have been nice to have, a lot of money, but she can manage perfectly well without it. She doesn't have all the hassle of fighting her own brother, taking them through the courts, dragging on and on and on and on. Let it go. Who cares? Be well and happy. So there's also that sometimes we can just say, okay, if that makes you happy, so be it. It depends on the situation. But in general, the whole idea is that we take difficult situations and instead of thinking of them as being an obstacle on our path, we recognize they're a great help. because we can work on feelings and emotions and reactions which don't come up when everything is going smoothly. And this is, as I've often said, you know, the gymnasium of the soul. You have to do a good, strong workout sometimes. You're not in a gymnasium the whole time. I mean, then you just end up completely flat out. But from time to time, it's good to have a good workout. That's how we get strong. We don't wish suffering on anybody. We don't wish suffering on ourselves either. But when it comes, then we have methods to deal with it. That's the important thing. We hope nobody ever does say bad things about us. We hope that nobody does try to cheat us, especially people we care for. All these horrible things, we hope nothing ever happens to us or to others. But when it does, then we can pick up and think, right, now this is my opportunity to really put these principles into practice. And instead of resenting, we can almost feel grateful because now we have the opportunity. As in other Lojong texts, it says when people are rude to us and not nice, we can take them as our spiritual master because they're teaching us patience. They're teaching us loving kindness beyond those who are nice to us. I mean, so these Lojong teachings are very, very important. It's very interesting now how they're being taken up by many other people, not just Tibetan Buddhists. You know, in the Buddhist world, Theravadins, Zen people are writing books on commentaries on these Lojong texts. And also I've heard some Christians who are taking it up now. They find it very, very helpful. And, you know, anybody can use it. You don't even have to have any religion at all. To realize that if we want inner happiness, then we have to deal with our mind. And the way to deal with the mind is to come up against all sorts of situations which challenge us. I mean, sometimes it all goes very smoothly, sometimes it's very difficult, but both of them are very helpful for us. You know, the waves go up, the waves go down. We should be able to have the Dharma boat, which floats on top of everything. And those waves are pushing us towards the other shore. We need waves. So may you all be well and happy. I have a wonderful new year. I hope that everything goes much, much more smoothly for the poor world, which is, you know, it's very interesting. I'm sure you have noticed too, that those of people who have a spiritual path, whatever one, have often benefited from this time of isolation because it's given them more time to be inward, not so much social pressure. They're being able to read. And now, of course, with internet, there's all these YouTube teachings. And there are many people who have found it very beneficial to stop for a change and take a few deep breaths. And it's only those people who don't have that kind of inner support who have really suffered a lot. I mean, there is much suffering in the world, but the important thing for all of you in America is not to plug in to that negative energy, right? Please, nobody, don't look at all the news and all the newspapers and all the paranoia which is being whipped up. Please, just sit there and do Tonglen, right? And send out light, send out love, send out hope, send out all the beautiful emotions into this world, because there's real pollution is the psychic pollution. That's very, very deep and black. All the fear, the anxiety, the anger, the hatred, the division. That's horrible. So don't plug into that energy. Please take it in and transform it into something very positive, because that's what the world needs, and especially America needs at this point. So this is what you can do for the world. You know, you can just transform that deep, thick pollution of fear and hatred into something beautiful and positive. And that is a true Lojong practice. And Geshe Langri Tangpa would be proud of you. Okay? Take care. May all be well. May all be happy. Thank you so much, Dasel.
Jetsunma, before you go, it's our great pleasure. We want to offer and say from all of us here in the United States and India, who's someone's online there, on behalf of all of us, we offer to you, we want to offer the long life prayer that was written for our beloved Jetsunma Tenzin Palmo. Shravasti, song of delight for the long life of Jetsunma Tenzin Palmo. Om Shvasti, the foremost mother of all Buddhas, Vajra Varahi, swift and noble accomplisher, marked with wish-fulfilling wheels, white Tara, she who bestows abundance, the deathless, Ushnisha Vijaya, and all supreme long life deities bestow virtue and goodness. You are a field of perfectly pure morality, laden with bountiful fruits of hearing, contemplating, and meditating, who wondrously brings forth happiness for all in the three worlds. Please remain forever as a spiritual friend at the heart of the practice lineage, utterly stainless and noble vase of sacred lineage teachings, holding the pith of Rechungpa's lineage of oral instructions. You who heals the weaknesses in the teachings and in beings, Jetsunma Tenzin Palmo, may your lotus feet firmly remain. By the blessings of the infallible truth of the three jewels, Duso Lamo, the five Seringma sisters and others, and by the ocean of activities of the Samaya-bound Dharmapalas, may the unfolding of your excellent deeds shine in the 10 directions. May the great nunnery of the ultimate lineage Donju Getsaling, a deep wellspring of the study and practice of Sutra and Tantra, flourish for as long as the sky remains, as a sacred tree of offering for sentient beings throughout the three worlds. Truly, we love you so much, Jetsunma. Live long.
Well, that's all. And please, may all your Dharma activities flourish. And don't worry, they will flourish. They really will. So you all help. Okay?
With you as a captain and His Holiness and Ken Rinpoche, I know I'll just be the best player I can be, but I trust my captain, so go team.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Thank you, Jetsunma.
Be well, live long.
Good to see you, Janet.
Good to see you, Smita. And Tom and Alexo. Happy New Year.